Good morning, everyone. We'll be approximately starting in 1 minute. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the Riverside County Water Task Force this meeting. I'm happy to announce our moderator for today's panel, Mr. Paul Jones, General Manager for Eastern Municipal Water District and Chair of the Riverside County Water Task Force.
Thank you. Good morning. On behalf of the Riverside County Water Task Force, thank you for joining our virtual speaker series event today entitled Adapting to Climate Variability Through Innovation. This morning, we have an extraordinary expert panel for you who will discuss how data, technology, and innovation are helping water agencies creatively shape adaptive approaches to increasing climate variability. Our panelists today include Abby Neston, who's an applied science systems engineer with NASA Jet Propulsion Labs, and Randall Nudek, program manager for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Before we begin, I have a couple of introductions and housekeeping items to cover on behalf of the task force. As Michael mentioned, I'm Paul Jones, General Manager of Eastern Municipal Water District, and I'm your moderator for today's event. As many of you already know, the Riverside County Water Task Force is a collaboration between Eastern Municipal Water District, Western Municipal Water District, and the Western Riverside Council of Governments, or WRCOG. Not only does this task force coordinate the speaker series, it's also charged with bringing public agencies and the private sector together to address current and future water issues on a collaborative regional basis. This year, both Eastern Municipal Water District and Western Municipal Water District have new board members. So I'd like to take a moment today to introduce those individuals. So on behalf of Eastern Municipal Water District, I'd like to introduce our new board member, Director Jeff Armstrong, representing Eastern Municipal Water District Division 4. Director Armstrong was recently elected to Eastern's board and is a retired water resources manager with over 32 years of experience in the water industry. Most recently, Director Armstrong served as the general manager of the Rancho California Water District, and we're very pleased to have someone with his extensive water background and expertise serving on Eastern's board. So please help me welcome Jeff Armstrong. Now I'd like to ask Craig Miller, General Manager for Western Municipal Water District, to introduce two of his new board members. Craig?
All right, thank you, Paul. Western is very happy to have a couple of new board members also. First off, Mike Gardner. Mike Gardner was elected in December. He represents Division 1 for Western. That area includes a portion of the city of Riverside, kind of between the 91 freeway extending towards the San Bernardino County line. Director Gardner in the past has served on the Riverside City Council for 12 years, where he's a member of the council committee overseeing Riverside's public utilities. And before that was a longtime employee for Edison. So he brings a great background of the public process to our board. He is currently a governor appointee for the Seismic Safety Commission and has served there under 3 governors. Next slide, please. We're also very happy to have a new director representing Division 5 at Western. This includes City of Corona, Home Gardens, El Cerrito, and a portion of Temescal Canyon. Director Rizvi is a business owner, a community advocate with an expertise working as a professional in the field of water management and consulting. She is also heavily involved in the community, serving many years on parent-teacher associations, working for the Interfaith Coalition, volunteering for organizations such as the Corona Norco Interfaith Association, Beloved Corona, and Cops and Clergy, to name a few. We're super excited to have both of those new directors representing us, and I think that the community is going to be very happy that they're doing that. Paul, back to you.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it. In the past, during our live events, it was our practice to introduce all elected officials in our audience. However, due to the virtual format, we're unable to continue that tradition. But I do know we have many other elected officials from our region participating in the webinar today. And I want to personally thank each of you for joining us and for really taking the time to be here. Now I want to switch over to a few housekeeping items we need to take care of. If you've already logged in, be sure to look for the Q&A button on your screen, which you can use throughout the webinar to submit questions. Staff will be monitoring your questions, and we will have a question and answer session at the conclusion of the panelist presentation. And also, if you're having any technical issues, let us know through that Q&A chat box. Or you can email us and our webinar host, Western Municipal Water District, at COMMDESK or comdesk at WMWD.com. Or you can text 951-234-7792 and we'll help you out with any technical issues you may have. Also, today's event will be recorded and a copy of the presentations will be sent out to all attendees who registered. And the recording will also be made available to those who have registered with us. So now with the housekeeping out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with the program. Our first panelist this morning is Abby Neston, who currently works with the MAIA, which stands for Multi-Angle Imager for Aerosols, and the MISR, Multi-Angle Imaging Spectroradiometer satellite projects at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL. These programs have a goal of using advanced satellite technology and data to really maximize benefits to society, in particular in the areas of climate science and adaptation. She also serves as one of JPL's coordinators for the NASA Disasters Program. Abby received her master's degree in planetary science from the California Institute of Technology and has a bachelor's degree in international field geoscience from the University of Montana. So please, let's give a warm welcome to Abby Neston. Abby, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. So as you mentioned, Paul, my name is Abby Neston. I'm an applied science systems engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And my job as an applied science systems engineer is to work with my NASA projects to maximize the societal benefit of what they are doing. So the Maya and MISA projects, as Paul mentioned, are on the air quality and disaster side of the JPL house. But I am here speaking to you today because of some recent work I have been undertaking to catalog JPL's earth science capabilities, and there are many, many of them, as you are about to see. So for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to take you on a high-speed tour of JPL's capabilities to respond to the climate impacts in the area of water management. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so first, just to clarify, because the relationship between JPL and NASA can be a little bit confusing for people who are not familiar with it. So JPL is NASA's federally funded research and development center. So that makes us a little bit different from the other NASA centers in that all of us that work at JPL are actually employees of Caltech. However, we spend almost all of our time working on NASA projects. And I'm showing here the current NASA Earth Science satellite fleet. It's quite an extensive one, as you can see. And all of the satellites that are circled in red on this chart are ones that are built and managed by JPL. And the ones that are circled in the red dash lines have JPL managed instruments on board. So as you can see, JPL is one of the foremost contributors to NASA Earth Science. So next slide, please. Okay, but to get down into the specifics of water management, I'm showing you a list here of JPL's airborne and spaceborne instruments that have capabilities that are relevant to water resource management. It's quite an extensive list, as you can see, and we're not going to talk about every single one of these instruments today, but we'll cover a fair few of them. But I also want to point out that JPL does not just fly airborne and spaceborne instruments. We also do a great deal of modeling and scientific research at JPL. So that means that our scientists and engineers are also an important asset in the field of water resource management. And I'll just point out that that image at the lower right is a picture of our EcoStress instrument, which is currently deployed on the International Space Station. So next slide, please. Okay, so here are the specific capabilities that I'm going to be covering in today's tour. Before we go on to the next slide, I just want to point out that JPL also has some very interesting work going on right now in the water quality and water pollution side. But in the interest of time, unfortunately, I had to focus on the areas of water supply, consumptive use, and water extremes. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so the first program that I want to tell you about at JPL is the Western Water Applications Office. This is a NASA-wide office, but it's headquartered at JPL. And the job of WAO, as it's called, is to develop custom solutions to water resource management problems using the expertise of NASA science and NASA data. So WAO has a large number of projects that may be interesting to you. I'm going to show an example of one on the next slide, but before I go on, I just want to point out that you'll be receiving a copy of these slides after the presentation. On every slide featuring a project or a program, I've included these links, and these links are intended to help you learn more if you're interested in that particular project or program. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so this is a particular example of a WAO project. And of course, I wanted to choose one from California, so it would be of most interest to you. So this is a satellite-aided irrigation project. It started in 2019, but it's still ongoing. And it involves using satellite data to help farmers make wise decisions about irrigation in real time. So before this project got started, NASA had already developed something called the Satellite Irrigation Management Support System, or SIMS, which is the system that provides satellite data into the CropManage API, which is CropManage is a tool, of course, that's available through the UC system. But the goal of this particular project was twofold. First of all, they streamlined the satellite data processing to go into CropManage so that we could reduce latency. And because of this project, that means that the time from the satellite observations to the data being available in CropManage has been reduced to less than 48 hours. And the other aspect of the project was to fly unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones, over specific crop types in the Central Valley to improve the satellite results for those particular crops. So the results of this project have been implemented into CropManage. I've included a link to CropManage in the lower right there if you are interested in learning more about it. And CropManage is currently providing over 3,000 irrigation recommendations to farmers every month in California. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to move on to talking about a particular satellite mission at JPL called GRACE Followon, or GRACE FO. You may have heard of the GRACE satellites or GRACE Followon, which is the second iteration of them. But if you haven't, I'll just say what I usually say to kids at open house, which is that the GRACE satellites are the only Earth-observing satellites NASA has that don't technically observe the Earth. It's two satellites that follow each other around in Earth orbit. And instead of looking down at the Earth, they stare at each other. And they measure the distance between themselves very, very accurately. And by keeping track of that distance, you can actually make a map of gravity underneath the satellites. And over time, you build up a map, as I'm showing here, of the changes in gravity. And the changes of gravity at any particular location on the Earth's surface are usually mostly due to the movement of water. There can be some more exotic things that change gravity, of course, such as a volcanic eruption. But water movement is the major thing that impacts gravity. So here we're looking at a map of gravity results combined with Global Precipitation Climatology Project, showing the movement of water at the surface and in the ground throughout California during the most recent drought. And GRACE Followon, which launched a few years after this data was collected, is continuing the mission of GRACE. And that data is quite important for those who work with groundwater and also for the study of drought. So GRACE data is included in the National Drought Mitigation Center's drought indicators, and I've, again, included a link to that in the lower right if you are interested to learn more. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I would say that the one downside of GRACE and GRACE Followon is that their spatial resolution, while pretty excellent, is not always sufficient for very high resolution applications. So if you need to know something about groundwater and GRACE's spatial resolution just isn't going to be able to do it for you, there is another way that we can get at groundwater movement from space, and it's Insar, synthetic aperture radar. So Insar, of course, I'm not going to get into all of the details about how Insar works, but Insar basically relies on comparing two different observations taken at different times. And from that, you can determine how the ground surface has changed during that period. So this is a map, excuse me, created by our ARIA project at JPL. And ARIA is basically a data system that takes data from all available SAR satellites currently operational and produces maps that are useful to water managers and other end users. So this is a map of subsidence in the Central Valley around Fresno, and you can see, Insar is able to provide a very high resolution picture of exactly how much subsidence is happening in that region. And of course, most of the subsidence is due to groundwater depletion. So ARIA provides information to the Department of Water Resources, which can be useful for groundwater depletion and unsustainable water use. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so another aspect of water in California is, of course, all of the infrastructure that we have to move water around the state. And JPL has a longstanding partnership with the Department of Water Resources to monitor some of the levees and aqueducts in California. So in the middle here, you can see two images taken by UAV SAR, which is an airborne SAR instrument, like the data that we were looking at in the past slide. But since UAV SAR is on an airplane rather than on a satellite, it can see even more high resolution features. So we see here two pictures of a levee in the San Joaquin Delta. And you can see that between these two images, roughly a year, there is disturbance that can be seen in the wall of one of the levees, which indicates a possible imminent seep. So this kind of data can be used to intervene early before the seep actually happens, such as shown on the lower right. And then also subsidence data, such as the data that we were looking at on the previous slide, can be very useful for studying the infrastructure of aqueducts, because of course, if you have excess subsidence in the area close to an aqueduct, that might indicate problems that you're about to have with that aqueduct's integrity. So JPL has been providing such information to the DWR since 2009. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so switching from groundwater and aqueducts to talk about streamflow, because of course streamflow can have a large impact both on water supply and of course during periods of flooding. So this isn't a satellite or airborne instrument. This is actually a model that was developed at JPL called RAPID. RAPID is an open source model, which is really excellent because anyone can go to the RAPID model hub that I've linked there at the bottom right, and you can get the source code to run RAPID for yourself. Unfortunately, we don't have time to show the video, but when you get these slides afterward, if you click on the figure of river flow in the river basins of California, that'll take you to a short animation that shows the rapid results in the river basins of California. And it's quite interesting to watch these great slugs of water moving through the system during winter atmospheric river events. And then I'll also just briefly mention a tool called WaterTrek. So WaterTrek was developed at JPL, and it's a visualization and analysis tool that incorporates rapid model results along with several other models and several sources of satellite data. And the goal is to provide basically a one-stop shop of several different kinds of data that can help you understand what's going on. This particular example image that I'm showing is for the Mississippi Basin. Unfortunately, WaterTrek is not currently available to the public, but there are ambitions of making it so. So the lead for that at JPL is Dan Crichton. And he asked me to convey to you that if you're interested in using WaterTrek, to please get in touch with him at the email address that he's provided here, and he would love to start a conversation about your particular needs towards the future goal of making WaterTrek publicly available. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I don't think any discussion of water resources at JPL would be complete without talking about the Airborne Snow Observatory, though as an important caveat before I get into this, the Airborne Snow Observatory is actually no longer a JPL project. It was from 2013 to 2019, but as of last year, there has actually been a private company formed to continue the work of the Airborne Snow Observatory, called appropriately Airborne Snow Observatories Incorporated. And moving forward, ASO Inc. will be providing the same data that ASO provided in the past. Okay, so Airborne Snow Observatory is a LiDAR mounted on an aircraft that can fly over mountainous regions during the winter to measure the depth of snowpack. And of course, this is very important for water supply because it provides a spatially resolved picture of snowpack as opposed to the point source measurements that are usually collected in person. So ASO has been flying over the Sierra for many years now, and ASO Inc. will be continuing to provide that information in the future. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when I was putting these slides together, Jolene Walsh suggested that a topic that might be of particular interest to this group of people would be the work going on at JPL on mid to long range precipitation forecasting. And particularly, of course, the topic of atmospheric rivers. Of course, I don't think I need to say anything to this crowd about the importance of atmospheric rivers to water supply in California. But JPL has been working again with the Department of Water Resources and the Western States Water Council to develop these mid to long range precipitation forecasts. And if you could please go on to the next slide, I'll show you a couple examples. Okay, so these are two different experimental forecasts that have been developed at JPL, and the lead for that effort is Dwayne Walliser, and he's been working with the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes. And these experimental forecasts are available on the center's site, and the link to that, again, is at the lower right. So the first forecast that you can see, the one in the middle here, is a 3-week outlook of the likelihood of the development of atmospheric rivers. So you can see I took these screenshots a few days after February 8th, which was the latest forecast at that time. And if you remember, of course, we had an atmospheric river event a couple weeks ago. So you can clearly see that in this forecast is, the dark green color indicating high probability of an atmospheric river forming. And then on the right, there's a second experimental forecast on the likelihood of ridging development within the next 6 weeks. And of course, the development of an atmospheric ridge may indicate a potential drying pattern. And of course, that's very important for understanding seasonal precipitation forecasting. So again, if you're interested in those forecasts, please make sure to go down to that site and check them out. Okay, next slide. Okay, so turning a little bit away from water supply to talk about evapotranspiration. So there are several instruments at NASA that study evapotranspiration, but the one I want to feature today is EcoStress. EcoStress, as I mentioned, is a JPL project that's deployed on the International Space Station, and it provides maps of evaporative stress. Unfortunately, since EcoStress is still relatively new, I wasn't able to show you a map of evaporative stress in California. This particular example is from Costa Rica, but I think it gives you a good idea of the capabilities of EcoStress. You can see areas where plants are experiencing high evaporative stress and areas that are much lower. And of course, this gives you valuable information both for agriculture and for understanding drought conditions. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then the last couple of slides here are about water extremes. So we'll talk about drought and then we'll talk about flooding. So for drought, I've already touched on briefly the use of GRACE Followon data in the National Drought Mitigation Drought Indicators. And then I also want to mention the AIRS instrument. AIRS is quite an antique instrument as satellite instruments go. It's coming up on its 20th anniversary, but it still works very well, and we expect it to continue working well into the future. And AIRS products provide data that is very useful for the early detection of drought. And both AIRS and GRACE data are incorporated into the production of the US Drought Monitor. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so a couple of slides to finish off talking about flooding. So I mentioned the ARIA project earlier, which takes available Insar data and produces products helpful for end users. Another one of the products that ARIA produces is called the Flood Proxy Map. So basically, when you have a situation where there are surfaces that are inundated by water, ARIA can produce what's called a flood proxy map, and I'm showing an example here from Mozambique that can give you a fairly high resolution picture of exactly what areas are completely inundated. So of course that can be very helpful for flood response. And ARIA posts all of their disasters related products publicly on their ARIA share site. And the link to that is of course right here if you would like to check that out and take a look at a few of their flood proxy maps. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then the last current mission that I'm going to talk about is SMAP. SMAP stands for Soil Moisture Active Passive, and as the name indicates, it studies soil moisture. So this is an example here. Again, I wasn't able to show you an example from California, unfortunately, but this is from Hurricane Harvey. And you can see that the pre-event data from SMAP shows that a lot of the areas around Dallas and Houston were already pretty saturated before Harvey even made landfall. And then on the right, of course, you see the corresponding SMAP data for after Hurricane Harvey. And you can see that soil saturation has increased even further. So this is a pretty good indicator, you know, if you're looking at SMAP data before a precipitation event, you can get an idea of what areas are most vulnerable to flooding because the soil is already saturated. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then this is pretty much my last slide, but I just want to give a mention to two upcoming missions that will be very important for water resource management, and those are NISAR and SWAT. So NISAR is a synthetic aperture radar, similar to the ones that we looked at earlier, but NISAR will be producing a huge volume of data that will all be publicly available, and that will help improve our ability to respond to issues such as flooding, and also to do some more of that subsidence work, such as the earlier slide that I showed you. And then SWAT is quite an interesting mission because it will be providing NASA's first data products of river height and storage change for reservoirs. So that'll be quite important. Okay, so I know that was a super high-speed tour, and I hope I didn't go through these things so fast that you weren't able to at least make note of the ones that you hope that you can learn more about in the future. If we go on to my last slide, this is just the attributions for each of the projects that I talked about. As I mentioned, I am not the leader of any of these projects, in fact, since I work on air quality and disasters. So if you're interested in learning more about these particular projects, then you may want to get in touch with the people listed on this slide. And with that, I'll wrap up, and I look forward to taking your questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Great presentation. Really appreciate the background. We've had several questions come in already, so I think a lot of people are interested, and we will be having the Q&A after our second presenter. So with that, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our second presenter. He is Randall Nudek, who represents Metropolitan Water District of Southern California on water supply, water quality, and environmental issues related to Southern California's imported water supply from the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary and watershed. Randall's also worked for the U.S. Geologic Survey, Tykert Construction, and the City of Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. He serves on numerous boards, including the board of the State and Federal Contractors Water Agency, Delta Reclamation Districts, and the Sites Reservoir Project Committee. Randall holds a master's degree in civil engineering and is a registered professional engineer. And so please join me in welcoming Randall Nudek. Randall?
Hey, thanks, Paul. I don't think my title, though, is as good as Abby's there. I always like those NASA titles. You know, one of the things I work on for Metropolitan, as Paul mentioned, is imported supplies. And usually when we go out and do talks, we talk about how we're improving water supply reliability through structural type improvements, whether it's, as many of you know, the Delta Conveyance Project or some of these new reservoir projects that folks are looking at through the state, such as Sites Reservoir. But today I want to talk about how we're trying to not only improve water quality, water supply reliability, but also adapt to climate change through different techniques. And I'm going to talk about how we're analyzing soil health and how that can help out. Next slide, please. Next slide. So as many of you know, Metropolitan is a wholesaler of water to Southern California for the 19 million people down here. We wholesale to 6 counties. We bring in water from the Colorado River Aqueduct. We're a member of the State Water Project. And then we have local agencies who do conservation, recycling, groundwater, and then also the Los Angeles Aqueduct. You can see the diversity of supplies we have. Next slide, please. We also are trying to do not just imported supplies, which I'll talk about one today, but we're also doing conservation, recycling, stormwater capture. And you can see it's not just even in Southern California. We have groundwater basins as we bring water in throughout the region, both in the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley, but also out near the Colorado River. Next slide, please. Wanted to talk to you not only about, our Metropolitan Board has goals on how we adapt to climate variability and resilience, but also we'd like to follow what the governor has out there with his water resiliency portfolio. And as you can see in his portfolio, he has a number of elements related to climate change, not only adapted to climate change effects, but also building a climate resilient system. And you can see the elements there to do it through recycling, conservation, stormwater capture, groundwater recharge, and modernizing the Delta infrastructure. Next slide, please. So we wanted to talk to you today a little bit about some of those adaptive approaches, and I said dealing with soil health. Next slide. So I'm going to focus on the imported supplies from the Bay Delta. And the Delta is a combination of waterways. It kind of looks like this in a way, but it's open to the ocean. We bring water down from Shasta Oroville Reservoir through the system of open channels down to pumps at the bottom part of the Delta, either the State Water Project pumps or the Central Valley Project pumps. Next slide, please. And when we do that, as like most projects, there's a number of risks associated with that. And you can see these are a lot of the risks we talk about when we're out there, but you can also see that a number of these really deal with climate change, whether it's flooding, sea level rise, subsidence of the soils, or fishery declines. So the next slide we're going to show here, and it's kind of one of the key slides. It's related to it's actually related to atmospheric CO2. It's based on a model that NASA has done with their supercomputer model. And I want you to pay attention as we click to it, to some of the dates. And what you'll see here is, why don't we click to it right now? You'll see the dates there on the bottom. And you also see those red plumes. That's red plumes of CO2. So you ask yourself, what's happening here? And then you can see the date is May. What's happening in modern agriculture during this period? What's causing these big plumes? And you'll start to see it change. So remember, in April, May, they're tilling the soil. Now we get into June. So why is everything clearing up in June? Next slide, please. The main reason is the plants are starting to grow, not just on the farms, but throughout the world. Plants are starting to grow, and as you can see here, that bare soil, instead of emitting the CO2 in the atmosphere, now it's sequestering it into the soil. Next slide, please. And in the Delta alone, that area of waterways, even though it has a lot of water in it, also has a lot of land in it. And you can see that over 2 million metric tons per year of CO2 is emitted in there. And it's equivalent to over 500,000 vehicles and a significant portion of California's CO2 emissions. Next slide, please. So what are we doing? We wanted to analyze, so what are the effects of that CO2? How does it really affect our water supply and our water quality? And one of the things we look at in the Delta is sea level rise projections. Now, the red and yellow there are just, it was an animation, it doesn't animate now, but it was an animation that showed, you know, if you had the 3 feet of sea level rise, how it might affect the existing levee or this existing levee system if you didn't do anything. And as many of you know, the Delta is like New Orleans. There's a series of islands and they're all below sea level. So if the sea rises, all that salt water, all that red is going to come in and fill in the Delta. So you can imagine taking water from the north there, those 2 blue rivers, the Sacramento and River coming down, and trying to move that through the Delta to the pumps and the bottom part of the Delta. So next slide, or in the one click, I should say. So what you see here is the prediction by the Ocean Protection Councils that they predict upwards of a 3 foot rise by 2050, 1 to 3 foot rise by 2050. And by 2100, a 3 to 10 foot rise. Now we realize that 10 foot is, the probability is fairly low out there, but we wanted to show kind of the range of at least what the state is looking at. Next slide, please. We also wanted to see, well, what is this effect of not only the sea level rise, but how does the climate change affect the timing of storms and the magnitude of those? And the Delta Stewardship Council just came out with a report this year. It said those peak storms are going to be more concentrated during the winter months, and the magnitude is going to be higher. So even though, as you can see in that top graph, that a lot of those levee failures we've seen over the last 100 years has declined now that the state is putting some money in and assisting some of the levee improvements, what we're seeing here is those we have to pay particular attention and continue to improve those levees because of this future probability. Next slide, please. So again, I mentioned that these islands are below sea level. Back in when Katrina hit in 2005, Katrina's levee system could withstand a 1 in 250 year event. These levees back in 2005 could withstand a 1 in 100 year event. So we're trying to, the state of California, the Corps of Engineers, Metropolitan, and others are trying to move forward in improving these levee systems, and also trying to improve or reduce subsidence. As you can see, these levees are 30 feet below. So if you go down one of these islands, you're going to be looking up to the water level. And if we do nothing, right now subsidence is continuing about a ½ inch to 1.5 inches a year. So if you move that out to 2100, now you're looking at another 3 to 10 feet more subsidence in the area. So instead of looking up at a 3-story building, now you're going to be looking up at a 4-story building. Next slide. So what are the research projects? And Michael, you can click through just 4 clicks right here. So these are some of the projects we're looking at. And again, this isn't the pipeline, the reservoir projects that you would normally see from up, but these are things that we feel will be effective if we start now and continue in the future. So the first one is wetlands. Growing wetlands to try to increase the soil, accretion of the soil. We can do that through tules, we can do that through rice. One of the things when we present this is people ask, well, that's great, Randall, growing wetlands, doing all that stuff is great, but someone's got to pay for it. And how do you pay for this? And you can't just go buy an island and grow wetlands because it's not producing money. So we looked at some techniques as well. One of them is polluted culture. And the title of this presentation is Adaptive and Innovative Approaches. And this would be innovative in California. It's not innovative, in Europe. This is done in Europe. So what pollutoculture is growing a wetland and just basically cultivating at least a part of it. So you still accrete soil, but you're also taking that other part and using it for insulation for homes or other things that they could use, whatever type of reed or tool they're using. The third one here is regenerative agriculture. You'll see the picture of sheep and where vines are, and then the grass between those vines. And I want you to look next time you go and drive throughout California. You'll see some areas that are doing this, and you'll see some are not. But this is the future. Why? Because farmers now, to do this, you can stop putting all that pesticides and herbicides on their crops. You can start using these natural techniques of sheep to keep down that grass. And then the grass, even in the center of these vineyard, keeps it cooler. The grass actually integrates by pulling down the CO2 into the soil, fixing that in the soil and interacting with not only the soil, but the roots of the vines as well. And then lastly, I wanted to show you the last one here. We have a little animation of floating peat wetlands. And when we first started this, I thought this was kind of way out there, but it's actually, again, this is not innovative. This is actually being done throughout the world, from Nova Scotia down to Florida. And we wanted to go over this technique because it's not only would help us improve the soil health, but what you'll see is it helps us improve the aquatic fish, which is one of our big things in the Delta. Ensure the fishery in the Delta remains active, and it also would help the terrestrial life and the birds as well. So let's click to the next slide. Thanks, Michael. And you'll see an animation here. This was a couple years ago. The gentleman, Kurt Smoody, here is pushing down on a peat bog. And what you'll see is it's floating in water. Next click, please. We've taken that little thing that he was pushing on there and started increasing it here. These are pools out there now that we started about a year ago. And all that stems grew within at least 2 months. And all of that is actually floating in the pools. Next click, please. What you'll see there on the bottom part is the kind of how it works. So what we're trying to do is grow this peat soil or peat mat. It will then go and integrate in with other peat mats to create this floating wetland. Below it, we'll be able to produce biomass to help the fish in the Delta, to improve the Delta's health. And then one more click, please. And as you can see here, here's a picture of one of the doctors from the USGS in Louisiana, Chris, I always forget how to say his name, Swarnzensky, but he is actually walking on those peat mats out there. And this is an expanse in Louisiana, but they also have them all the way out through Florida as well. So again, this is a way to benefit not only terrestrial and aquatic habitat, but also it filters the water, so it improves water quality, and it begins to restore some of the subsided lands we have in the Delta. Next slide, please. So we are working with a number of agencies out there, not only NGOs, Nature Conservancy, Environmental Defense Fund, some government agencies as well, and universities to try to understand how much CO2 is coming off those islands. You can see a cornfield in the background here. This is on one of Metropolitan's islands that we're doing some research on, so we get a good baseline. So as we start these projects, again, we want to be sure we have some money to do this and not just be a money sink. so that we can go and get carbon credits off this and continue that process to improve not only the soil, improve water quality, improve water supply reliability. Next slide. So I think this is one of my last slides here. Paul, no, I got one more slide after this, but this was a study done by Dr. Steve Deverell that said if we do nothing, the risk of, you can see the yellow bar there shows the risk of levee failures. But if we start implementing some of these techniques, either growing rice or growing wetlands, it will actually reduce the amount of levee failures in the Delta. Next slide. So this is my last slide to show how they kind of all wrap up. And there's a number of clicks here. So Michael, if you could just, I'll say click once here. So trying to reduce the subsidence, doing some of that soil accretion, we can move the soil up. Now it starts at 1 to 2 inches a year, but by 2100, you're moving that 30-foot depth of that subsided island now, and you're bringing it up almost by half. And shallower depth islands, you're going to bring it up even sooner. We can improve water supply reliability. One more click or 2 clicks here. By not only doing that structural improvement of rock on the side, but also doing some habitat enhancements. So if you combine some of the structural improvements with rock on the top of the levee, then you can begin starting putting trees and stuff on the top of the levee for shaded riverine aquatic habitat. And one more click. This may be my last one. I think it's, yeah, it is over. So overall, like I said, we usually come here and talk about the structural things we're doing, but we're also working on soil health and showing how that can lead. Right now in the Delta, we're kind of on this degenerative track where it's just subsiding. We want to start to turn that around, go to sustainable and eventually regenerative so that we can save the Delta, which again is the water supply hub for 2/3 of California. Paul, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very good, Randall. Thank you very much. Fascinating presentation. The very innovative program Smith is looking at for sustainability in the Delta. So thanks. Now we're going to go to the Q&A portion of our agenda. As I mentioned earlier, any member, any participant in the webinar may ask a question by clicking the Q&A button on your screen and type the question in the question box. We've received several questions already, and staff will continue to monitor the questions, and we'll do our best to get to them. If we don't get to your question today, we'll make sure that it is answered, and we will provide you that information after our event. So with that, Abby, I'm going to start out with a question for you, and thank you again for your presentation. And I appreciate the overview you provided of the satellite-related programs and work that NASA JPL are doing, but maybe you could focus a little bit on what are JPL's near-term plans for future work on improving climate resilience, specifically in California.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So JPL very recently, within the last couple of months, signed a new memorandum of understanding with the state of California. And we are very excited about this MOU because our hope is that it will lead to a more coordinated partnership between JPL and the state, which will allow us to take a more strategic view of what projects can have the highest impact in improving resources that the state can use to respond to climate change. So I would say that talks related to that MOU are still going on, and the identification of new projects is still going on, but we're very excited to see what might happen coming out of that MOU, and there have already been a few small projects that have gotten started this summer, and we're very happy to hear about that. And of course, we're looking forward to the launch of SWAT and Insar in the next couple of years to provide, just a huge amount of new data in regards to these areas.
Great, thanks, Abby. Randall, I'm going to go to you for a quick question. I really appreciated you giving us an overview of some of the work Met is doing on the Delta Islands, the carbon sequestration work and so forth. how are, maybe you could describe this. Are the local stakeholder and other interests who are resident to the Bay Delta region supportive of these concepts and these projects? Because they are changed to kind of the farming community up there in their approach. What are you getting as far as local feedback?
Yeah, you're right. It is a change to the local farming techniques. Actually, it's changed the local techniques throughout the nation. But I think people are starting to realize, especially in the Delta, you see it on a daily basis when you're on these islands. They're below sea level, so you're looking up to the water, and they realize that they have to do something to stop that soil just drifting away, oxidizing up. So these techniques are not only helpful for that, but they're also helpful actually to make money. And to give you an example, the last 4 or 5 years, crop prices, they grow a lot of corn in the Delta, and crop prices for corn have been really down. And so they've been looking at growing rice in the Delta. In fact, they actually do it in various parts. So now you're getting big name farmers out there saying, hey, we can not only grow rice, it will help out stopping subsidence, it will help out reducing CO2 in the atmosphere, but we're actually making more money on it. So that whole mantra, grow corn, grow corn, grow corn, because it's just real easy now, is changing one to more, let's be more sustainable and we can make more money.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that, Randall. Abby, we're going to go back to you. Abby, you mentioned, and I looked on your website in 2022, the launch of the surface water ocean topography and the synthetic aperture radar, the Insar project. And as I said, that's coming up here, and you mentioned that and touched on it briefly in your presentation. But how are those two projects really going to focus on water availability applications and really kind of the wider scope of NASA's data collection as it relates to water resources?
Yeah, so I already talked a little bit about how the products that Insar and SWAT are going to be providing that are relevant to water resource management. On the Insar side, subsidence products and also the ability to track surface inundation are perhaps two of the most important applications for water resource management. Though I also saw, and sorry to jump ahead, but there was a question in the chat about using SAR to monitor dam health.
Yes.
And that is definitely something that has been done with SAR data. There was a really excellent case study of the Mosul Dam, which is in Iraq, of monitoring that dam with SAR, and they were able to detect some cavities that were forming in and around the dam because it's actually a dam built on karst. And they were able to go in and fill those cavities before any danger should occur. So SAR is definitely relevant to monitoring dam health, though with the caveat, I'll say that you need a very high resolution SAR in order to be able to do that. And then SWAT, of course, with the river height, of course, that's relevant for flooding. And I think, of course, to this crowd, the water storage capacity for reservoirs will be a huge application for water resource management. But I also want to just mention that both SWAT and Insar are causing a huge revolution in how NASA distributes data, because Insar alone is expected to bring down 85 terabytes of data every single day. So if you can imagine, that's just an incredible amount of data, and it will quickly, Insar's own data record will quickly overwhelm all of the data that has ever been produced by NASA Earth observing satellites to date. So because of that, because it would be absolutely ridiculous to ask an end user to download 85 terabytes of data just to get one day's worth, NASA is moving eventually all of its earth science data into the cloud, so that you wouldn't have to go in and download all of that data onto your local machine. You can do all of the analysis right there in the cloud and then only download the results that you need. So we're really excited about this new model of earth science data, because it will really synthesize data from across all of the NASA centers. It will all be available in that one central cloud location. So that's something that's ongoing right now, and you can expect NASA to be implementing over the next 2 to 3 years. And we're very excited for that new model of data access.
Great, thank you. Randall, let me ask you a question. We had a couple questions on this. We have interest in the part of your presentation that dealt with the concept of using the floating peat islands. Is that a practice that could work in saline environments? And specifically, one of our participants asked, could it be applied, for example, to someplace like the Salton Sea? So has there been any work to look at those floating peat islands and their application in a more saline environment?
We haven't done any of that work. Most of the work we're looking at is in either a brackish or freshwater type environment, but that's something we should look into. We know it's been done, like I said, in the brackish water. We know it's been done in various climates, from all the way up to Nova Scotia, Germany, Holland, all the way down to Florida and the Florida Keys or Florida area, and also around Louisiana. So it's there's a number of different environments, but specifically in a saline environment, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Randall, and I think the individual who asked the question, I'm projecting what they're thinking, but they're probably looking in terms of not only the carbon sequestration benefits, but the stabilization of the Salton Sea. So yeah, so it seems like it might be something at least to be looked at. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Abby, going to go back to you. This is an interesting question. Does JPL have any data or kind of research on the efficacy of cloud seeding as a means of increasing precipitation in select areas? For example, and was any of the work that your group was doing address this? Specifically, the questions pertaining to San Gabriel and San Bernardino Mountains and the Southern Sierra and potential effects of cloud seeding.
Very interesting question. As far as I am aware, NASA has not done any work on cloud seeding in, shall we say, the recent decades. There were definitely some cloud seeding experiments that went on in the 60s, but I am personally not aware of any recent work by NASA in this area, though I do believe that there is some work going on in cloud seeding, just not by NASA.
Very good. Okay, thanks. Randall, got another question for you. I'm very familiar. Met has an overall climate action plan that you've put together dealing with obviously your water supplies from the Colorado River and the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary, your storage programs and so forth. How does the projects that you've pointed out, the research projects, certainly understand how they benefit the Delta, but how do they really kind of fit into that climate action plan?
That's a good point, Paul, because number of the projects that we're doing out there, other water agencies throughout Southern California are doing to try to reduce your electrical uses, bring down your climate change, bring down CO2 as well, or reductions, whether it's through electrifying your fleet or doing things like that. We're putting out solar panels near our filtration plant lands that we don't use out there. So what about the Delta? I mentioned the Delta is a fairly big area. Metropolitan owns right now 4 islands in the Delta system, our supply reliability. And instead of farming the lanes that we currently do right now, we're farming them based on we've only owned it for a couple of years. So we're basically growing corn. So the more we can take that corn growth off and put another crop on, the more we're going to be able to reduce greenhouse gases. As you know, corn goes to feed cattle, and there's nothing bad about cattle, but then that whole cycle continues if they go to a feedlot. So moving having some I can't get the word out right now, but having the whole system work together, bringing either cattle onto the land or finding ways to reduce that CO2 will be a big help, and at least Metropolitan meeting its goal, because the Delta is so big and these islands can really sequester a lot of carbon if you start working today.
Yeah, I'm gonna, we had another question pop up in the chat box, and maybe it goes to carbon sequestration. And the question is, do you think, and do you feel like our country is behind the rest of the world on some of these adaptive approaches to carbon sequestration? Are we world leaders? Or, what is kind of your view based on your research, Randall, and what you're seeing?
No, I think I agree with the commenter there. We're behind on this. A lot of the techniques that we do, and you can see it in some of the presentation, we're learning stuff from Holland. We're learning stuff from polluticulture is not done in the United States, but in Germany they've found a way to not only grow the tules to sustain the land, but also to make money off it through insulation projects and others. We're starting to do that. UC Davis is looking at polluticulture. That's one of the folks we're working with, and they have a bioreactor. So they actually taken that off the part of the stuff that we don't keep on the ground, taking it and actually producing energy at UC Davis. Now it's a pilot area that they're doing it on, but still, at least it's a start. But you're right, we're way behind on this. In some areas, in the United States, we do this, like floating wetlands, but we need to learn how to take it from, like I said, the Florida, and actually move it to California and not be afraid to try it. And so that's why we're starting with a pilot project, starting slow, understanding it to be sure it works, before we start spending a lot of money on it.
Great, thanks. Abby, question from one of our participants. The question is, the participant said there's a European company called Earwatch, and they use satellite data to look into the root zone of trees, plants, and then provide data to water agencies that can advise farmers on more precise irrigation scheduling. And this is versus using kind of above ground crop coefficients. So is there any of the data that NASA produces or any of the work that was being done on the satellite imagery that could then be provided to water agencies, and then water agencies could make that available to their agricultural irrigation customers?
Yeah, great question. I would say that first and foremost, NASA's policy is to make all NASA data publicly available. So all of the satellite missions that I discussed today, that data is available online. Of course, just because it's available doesn't mean that it's available necessarily in a form that's particularly useful to people who aren't, who don't work with satellite data every day. So, what I would say is that for root zone soil moisture, perhaps you would want to explore a combination of SMAP data and GRACE data. What I would say would be the currently available data products that would be most useful for that particular application. And of course, both SMAP data and GRACE data are available, but that's why we have organizations like WAYO who are there to help take the satellite data and turn it into data products that are of most use to end users. So yeah, and of course, if you're interested in those particular projects, I hope that you'll take a look at the links that I've provided. And if you want to follow up with questions, please do feel free to email me, and I can help get you connected with the groups at JPL that can help you with your question.
Very good, thank you. Well, and just to add on there, Abby, you mentioned that NASA JPL produces the data. But then other groups will then put programs like this together to disseminate that data. Are you aware on the agricultural front of any organization that might be doing that in California?
So I have to say that I'm not, other than the products that I talked about in my presentation, so, things like the SIMS data that's provided to crop manage. So that's an example of data that's intended for the use of irrigation decision making that is already in a pipeline that's provided to farmers in ways that are quick and easy for them to use. But in that there's always the potential for developing new projects, and of course, as I mentioned with the new MOU coming out, we're hoping to identify a whole slew of new projects that could be helpful to end users. So we're always grateful to hear about what your needs are and how we can design pipelines to meet those needs.
Very good. We're going to have one closing question now for each of you. Randall, back to you for your closing question. And thank you for overviewing those various approaches and climate adaptation research that's being done. To implement some of those projects full scale, Randall, what are really the costs? What are the order of magnitude of the costs that we'd be talking about? And kind of an add-on question to that, typically the state periodically has water bonds. There's proposed water bonds for this year. Do you think there's something or money that should be put into the water bonds, and how much, should there be an emphasis on this in future water bonds?
Paul, I do think there should be some emphasis on this, especially for the Delta. I mean, this issue of trying to stop subsidence has been there for when it started, and over the last 100 years now, we're 30 feet below the water level in the Delta. We can't continue that. If we do 2/3 of California's water, it's going to be impacted, and then try to find the solution to that is going to be continuing to get bigger and bigger and bigger. We can't lose the Delta. It not only affects the water supply, but if you brought all that water in, you're going to affect millions of homes, transportation to San Francisco, homes in Stockton, Sacramento, pipelines, et cetera, et cetera. So trying to find, or at least to stop the subsidence is a way. And folks in the Delta have been looking at this. They want to do the right thing. They just need to change the mantra of, let's put chemicals on the soil, let's put herbicides, let's throw fertilizer down. Because it does produce a crop, but it doesn't keep the soil there. Because once the crop is gone, then the soil doesn't have any bugs in it, doesn't have any cover to it, and then it starts blowing away. So at least some money to start educating people. I know that seems kind of weird, but it's just the mantra of farming throughout the United States since the 50s is throw chemicals at it, nitrogen, put herbicides, pesticides, and we've seen what's happened with the Dust Bowl in the 50s. And the killing of the microbes in the soil. So the more we can help that out, the more we can stop some of the desertification throughout the United States, and specifically meet some of our carbon sequestration goals or reduction goals through these improvements in the Delta.
Thank you, Randall. Abby, closing question for you. You described a lot of research and satellite technology that NASA and JPL have been implementing, and quite impressive. How does NASA judge the success of these applications of the project? What's their success quotient of the projects that you've described?
Yeah, I think this is a really excellent point to close out on because it kind of talks about the wider role of NASA in relationship to all of the other federal agencies and state and local agencies. So NASA's role is really to develop new technologies. That's kind of our mandate from the federal government, is to do what hasn't been done before. So when we approach, an application such as let's talk about the Airborne Snow Observatory. So the Airborne Snow Observatory met a need from the Department of Water Resources, a very urgent need. And in response to that, we developed this technology, the Airborne Snow Observatory, Airborne LiDAR, to provide the information on snowpack that DWR was looking for. But unfortunately, sometimes the fate of these kinds of projects can be that once they turn into, say, an operational type of project where, all of the technology has been developed, all of the algorithms have been written, all of the data systems have been set up, now NASA has a problem on its hands because it's no longer developing something new. And at that point, we no longer have a mandate to keep operating it. So really the success of an application at NASA, it has to do with technology transfer, because what we don't want to happen is for us to develop this enormous operational technology and capability and then have it just die because NASA can no longer fund it. And unfortunately, that has happened sometimes, and we're always really sad when it does. So with Airborne Snow Observatory, this really represents a success story for us because, Airborne Snow Observatory was approaching the point where NASA really couldn't make a justification to fund it anymore. But instead of it unfortunately dying and going away, it was able to be transferred to Airborne Snow Observatories Incorporated. So that that technology that was developed could be used in perpetuity to continue to provide data that DWR and others in the US will continue to use, hopefully, for snowpack rather than Airborne Snow Observatory just dying into the void. So really that is the measure of success for NASA. It has to do with technology transfer. Once we have completed the development of it, we want to see it get transferred to someone who can continue to operate it into the future.
Great. Thank you, Abby. Abby, Randall, excellent presentations, very informative, and we really appreciate you answering all the questions that were put forth. And again, your information is be sent out to our participants today. So thank you both very much. So now, before we conclude the program, I want to share some recent changes in the Riverside County Water Task Force. As many of you know, I'll be retiring this spring, and I've stepped down as the chair of the task force. So this will be my last speaker series event as your host. It's really been my pleasure and privilege to serve as the chair of the task force and really be part of this wonderful speaker series program. I want to thank all of you, our participants, for your support of this speaker series and for your interest in water issues that shape both our state and our region. I also want to thank the staff from Eastern Municipal Water District, Western Municipal Water District, and WRCOG for their excellent behind-the-scenes work in making the Riverside County Water Task Force successful. There is so much coordination that goes on for these events and the things that we undertake. And I want to particularly acknowledge from Eastern Municipal Water District, Danielle Coates, April Cody, and Jolene Walsh, and from Western Municipal Water District, Michael Hadley, Sarah McDonald, and Grace Cardenas. These individuals do a fantastic job, along with our partners from WRCOG, Chris Gray and Rachel Singer. So I want to thank you all for your extraordinary efforts in making this such a successful program. At our most recent meeting of the task force, my friend and colleague and the current vice chair of the task force, general manager of Western Municipal Water District, Craig Miller, was elected as our new task force chair. In addition, Jason Yulee, the general manager of the Riverside County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, was chosen to serve as vice chair. So I want to congratulate both these individuals in their new leadership roles. And now I'd like to turn it over to Craig to say a few words about his plans for the task force. Craig?
Thank you, Paul. It really is an honor to have this opportunity to work with the task force, and Jason and I are super excited about where we have an opportunity to move the task force. But I think as my first action as chair, I'm going to flex my chair authority, and I'd like to play a little video. Michael?
When I became county supervisor, it became clear to me, having previously served on the Eastern Municipal Water District Board, that elected leaders, civic leaders, knew very little about water. And water is life. We don't grow, we don't prosper without water. And as a result of that, we started the Water Task Force. That was Riverside County and WRCOG.
When Paul came on at Easter and he saw the value of that organization and revitalized it, started a speaker series, and really brought in some high quality people to educate our area on water.
The public has gained a much greater appreciation for the historic and the current complexities behind how water gets delivered to our tap. It seems like such a simple thing at home, and it's such a reliable thing that nobody ever has their water not come out of their tap. And it's a very complex issue, and you've done a great job in bringing a number of speakers from all levels of water expertise to share their knowledge and their experiences on how important water is to our economic development.
He spends a lot of time trying to make it interesting to those that aren't in the water industry, which isn't always easy. And he's really paved a road that we'll all want to follow.
And Paul just did a wonderful job. That'll be part of his legacy. If you want to know something, you want to get something done, you come to Paul Jones.
Well, Paul, on behalf of all of us at WRCOG, we want to wish you all the best in your retirement. And we thank you for all the contributions that you've made to the region.
So, Paul, thank you for all your hard work, your dedication, being there and driving these meetings and making sure that it comes off well every single time. We appreciate your effort and enjoy your retirement.
When you came to Eastern, it was a really good organization, but you've really taken it to another level. And really appreciate that. The support that you've given me as a director, not only at Eastern, but at Metropolitan and Aqua, has been really valuable and important to me. I know that we will continue to work together into the future, and I just wish you all the best.
I wish him the very best in his retirement. Having been retired myself a little over 2 years, I know the feeling, and I wish him that he'd have the same happiness that I'm enjoying since I retired.
Hey, Michael, can you play that virtual hand clap, the applause? Paul, thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
You've done a really great job. And I think today is a great example of where you've taken the task force. Randall and Abby are here to talk about things that normally we wouldn't hear about in Riverside. And it's just really a tribute to the task force and to you that we need to hear about what's happening in the Delta. We don't think about it in Riverside necessarily, that 2/3 of the state water have to get through that Delta. And as those islands sink, that is a huge amount of water that's in jeopardy, and we should all care about that. And, Abby just being on the cutting edge of technology and developing scientific tools that will assist us in all of our water management decisions. I just think that it's just so indicative of, where you've taken the task force and broadened the horizons for Riverside. And, just thank you so much for your vision.
Thank you, Craig. I really appreciate that very much. It's really been wonderful to be a part of the Riverside County community and in the water community in Southern California. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anything else you want to say, Craig?
You've done a great job of carrying on what Mary and Ashley started, and, Director Record has certainly been a visionary and his assistants in the task force, and Rick with WRCOG. It's been a lot of people understanding the value of the effort, and as the incoming chair, I'm driven to continue. Nothing's getting easier in water. Between drought, climate variability, certainly water affordability, water quality issues, constituents of emerging concern. There's no shortage of challenges, and we have to keep Riverside engaged, and we need to be engaged. We live in it's 100 degrees all summer here, and it's very, very dry out, and we have a thriving community that is thriving because of water. And so, the importance can't be underestimated. And, my goal as the incoming chair is just to continue to grow this effort and continue what my predecessor's been doing. So looking forward to it, and can't wait for the challenge. So thank you very much for all you did, Paul.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it. Well, very good. This concludes our program today. And on behalf of the Riverside County Water Task Force, I want to thank our excellent panelists once again. A copy of the presentations will be sent out to all the attendees, along with a survey about today's webinar. We're always looking for your ideas for future speaker topics, so please share those, and we'll do our best to get the highest quality speakers available to provide you the best information on water resources in California and in the region. Our next speaker series event will be held Friday, April 23rd, 2021. So save that date and watch your inboxes for more information. So thank you for your time and for your interest in today's webinar. Please have a wonderful